Um, so about my schooling, it was gosh, why is this so hard to answer? It shouldn't be that hard to answer. It really shouldn't be. My name is Gwen Ulison, and this is my documentary for educating a diverse population. I hate that intro. So I went to a public school, and it was definitely in like a suburban community. All my friends, all my neighbors went to the same school as I did. We took similar classes together, and it was definitely like an upper middle class area. Like my school was like very well funded. We had a class set of calculators. We got shirts for all the shows that we did. We got to build these elaborate sets for all of our productions. Like we had funding. We had plenty of funding for the school to run. I'm sure that there were areas that I didn't know about as like a youngling that we were lacking in funding, but it didn't feel that way when you're going to school. And I was a part of like a gifted and talented program through middle school, which basically meant that me and like 30 other kids went to all the same core classes together. So we had math, science, history, and English together. And all 3 years, those subjects were taught by the same teachers. So I had the same teachers and the same group of kids with me for all 3 years of those core classes. And that was so beneficial because it allowed the teacher to create like such a solid foundation for us to keep building on and building on every single year. And I know from like experience from like my siblings going to school, like they're not in that program and they definitely have not grown as much. Like I know that me as a writer, like I used to suck at English and I'm still not great, but if it hadn't been for that gifted and talented program, I wouldn't have grown the same way I did because that teacher really got to know and understand me and my struggles and spend 3 years working with me through them. The same thing with math, where this teacher really got to figure out what makes sense and what connected with every individual student and work through that with them. One thing that really helped me in school was I was a very traditional student. I fit into the mold of standardized practice, like standardized testing, like core, like the standard core and all that stuff. Like that fit me as a student. That fit the way that I learned. So I definitely was never like inhibited by these like new techniques and these new things that were these new ideologies that were coming up in my school. Like I just moved right into them. I'm an excellent test taker. I can BS my way through the whole ACT because trust me, I did. Just things like that was like never an issue for me, but I definitely had a couple of friends that were different learners, different thinkers, and they were not good test takers and they struggled through their whole schooling. And just the teachers couldn't do anything about it. The school couldn't do anything about it because they had this mold that a certain student fit. And I was lucky enough to fit it, but a lot of my other friends totally didn't. One thing that I feel like I super lacked in my school was different cultures and diversities. I made my first Black friend in literally, I think, 8th grade. My first, yeah. So if that doesn't give you kind of a feeling of what growing up was like in that community, there was not a lot of diversity. I did get to interact a lot with some members of the LGBTQ community. My friend came out to me in middle school, and I got to help him work through that and I got to see really quickly how different students and different teachers kind of interacted with him and how they weren't willing to mold their classroom ideology and their classroom practices maybe like around that individual. It was very hard to see some of my friends, especially the one who came out as transgender, just be disregarded, be called by his name because it's what's on the roll and you're a female at birth, but he was a he and he wanted to be called a him. And it's interesting because I totally saw the same thing just happen when I went and did my observations. Talking about my future classroom is really hard for me, and I think it's because I still feel super ignorant when it comes to all sort of social justice, culturally responsible classrooms. I'm still figuring out how to create that and how to build that. I'm also just feeling inadequate, which is gonna hopefully go away a little bit after the next 2 more years of schooling. And I know that I will continue to learn and grow as an educator even after I graduate. I mean, you don't ever stop learning, right? But right now, kind of the biggest takeaways from this class for me is Number one, realizing that you will never know everything about your student. You just won't. You will never see the background about what they're dealing with at home to the full extent. You'll never know what they're dealing with their peers in their other classes. Like, you just won't. But if you take the time to get to know them the best that you can create the most culturally responsible classroom and like social justice classroom that you can. And I think that's super important, is just taking the time to get to know each student as an individual. And then I think the other thing is just creating a space where students can ask questions, where students feel safe to learn more about social justice and to learn more about how they can be used as change, and kind of to give them the skills in the toolbox, right, to become agents of change, as the strand says, I think. And I think it's one of those things of not pushing on them, right? You don't push them towards social justice. You don't try to reinforce everything, but I think you educate, right? You educate about, here are the problems that are going on. Here are the ways that we can fix it. You try to help them feel that desire in themselves to make the change. And I think if you can kind of educate and put some wood on that fire of social justice that I think everybody has to some degree, then hopefully that will bleed into your classroom as well, of creating a classroom that is socially and culturally responsible, and that your students will learn to respect each other and you as the educator.